Hi, I'm Riz Khan. More than 10,000 athletes from over 200 countries are gathering in Paris this week for the 2024 Olympic Games. An audience in excess of 3 billion people is anticipated to watch on TV and digital platforms as their sporting heroes run, jump and throw, lift, ride and row. And some of them will even do it on horseback. But even before the first starting gun has been fired, a shadow has been cast over what should be the epitome of sporting excellence. A shadow which causes some to question whether or not we can trust the results to reflect fair competition between clean athletes. Well, cheating in sporting events is as old as the Olympic Games itself. In ancient times, Greek athletes who broke the rules were flogged or shamed by having their names inscribed on statues outside sporting arenas. In the modern era, the names of individual drug cheats, such as the sprinters Ben Johnson and Marion Jones, were written into Olympic history as the results of their misdeeds were captured forever on camera. And whole nations have been tarnished by state-sponsored doping. The feats of East German swimmers were fueled by drugs in the 1970s. The 2010s saw Russian athletes banned from competing as a national team after multiple cases of cheating and cover-up were exposed. And in recent weeks, a new row has blown up with swimming again in the spotlight. A report by the New York Times claimed that 23 Chinese swimmers had tested positive for a heart medication drug before the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. China's anti-doping agency claimed traces of the drug were found in the kitchen of the team hotel and concluded the swimmers innocently ingested the substance through food or the environment. Well, subsequent investigations by the World Anti-Doping Body, WADA, found no evidence to make them disagree. But critics, including the US watchdog USADA, believe the test results were covered up, unfairly allowing the swimmers to compete and win medals at the Games. The episode leaves a number of essential questions. Can viewers around the world be sure they're watching a fair competition at the Olympics? Has technology meant it's now easier or more difficult for drug cheats to avoid detection? How do clean athletes feel about competing against opponents they suspect of cheating? And is the global anti-doping system capable of restoring trust in sport? In this episode, I'll discuss these questions with one of the world's most successful swimming coaches and a 6-time world swimming champion. But first, let's meet the man sometimes described as America's sheriff of sport. Travis Tygart is the CEO of the US anti-doping body, USADA. He exposed the world's most famous cyclist, Lance Armstrong, as a drug cheat, and now he's set his sights on what he believes is a serious case of state-sponsored doping. Travis Tygart, thank you very much for joining me on the show. Let me start by asking about the Chinese anti-doping agency, CNADA, investigating the positive tests for TMZ in 2021 and then concluding they were caused by contamination from a hotel kitchen where the swimmers were staying. Then WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, investigated and concluded there was no evidence to prove otherwise. And then in recent weeks, WADA appointed a special investigator to review the case. And that investigator effectively reported there was no reason to change its decision. What makes you so sure there's something suspicious going on here, and do you have any proof?
Yeah, well, the proof is they didn't follow the rules, and WADA has acknowledged that CNADA didn't follow the rules, even if you believe the contamination theory, which is really difficult to believe. But even if you did believe that, the rules require every organization to announce the positive tests. So they swept these under the carpet so people weren't aware of them. You have to disqualify the athletes in the event at which they tested positive, and you have to have a first violation. And please understand, WADA did not think that it was a clear case of contamination. In fact, if you look at the independent review, the self-review that WADA just did, even though it was handcuffed and blindfold from the beginning, they interviewed the science director and the science manager at WADA, both who had serious doubts about the contamination theory, but felt like there was nothing at that time that they could do. But ultimately, WADA allowed China to sweep these under the carpet, and they flipped strict liability. In our world of anti-doping, every athlete around the world is held to strict liability. And in this case, both CNADA and WADA flipped strict liability on its head and allowed athletes to have special treatment that no other athletes around the world under the rules deserve.
again, with Chinada's perspective, they've denied any wrongdoing, and they've had some pretty choice words to say about you, accusing you of manipulating the case for political purposes, undermining the reputation of Chinada and Wada by accusing them of a cover-up and suggesting you're guilty of out-and-out hegemonism and imperiousness. Can you see any of their point of view?
Yeah, listen, it's just, that's not what this is about at all. We're about ensuring the rules for all athletes are upheld. This is a potent drug. It's not given to meat or to cattle. It doesn't show up just magically in kitchens and is served to athletes. It doesn't happen. There's no situation where this happens like this. And you couple that or put that on top of the fact that there was a whistleblower that defected from China who said that the Chinese systematically were using TMZ to dope their athletes at low levels. You combine those two things with the fact that they didn't follow the rules. They didn't announce these cases, even if you believe the contamination. So Chinada didn't follow the rules, and that's crystal clear. And maybe they don't like the fact that we know the rules and are saying the rules should be followed, but our athletes are demanding, and athletes around the world are demanding that there be open and transparent processes and that the rules apply equally, because it's not fair to athletes from whatever country.
Yeah, I'll touch on the athletes in a second. Now, from what I understand, the U.S. Justice Department has launched an investigation, though it won't confirm or deny that is the case. WADA's accused the U.S. officials of exceeding their authority. It says it's extraterritorial criminal jurisdiction of the participants in the global anti-doping system. Now, I wonder to what degree the U.S. justice system does have a right to and an authority to investigate this.
And that's nothing more than just baseless rhetoric and retaliation, trying to scare people into stop asking the legitimate questions that WADA has still refused to answer, and that Chinada has still refused to answer, of how these 23 positive tests on the eve of the Olympic Games in 2021 for elite swimmers who went on to win multiple medals, how they could possibly have been swept under the carpet. They should have been announced, they should have been disqualified, and there should have been first violations.
You've mentioned athletes, and a number of them from around the world have expressed their concerns. And two of America's greatest athletes, swimmers Michael Phelps and Alison Schmidt, recently testified before Congress, saying they'd lost confidence in the effective testing of athletes. Now, they feared it could ultimately threaten the credibility of the Olympic Games. To what extent do you share that view?
Well, unfortunately it does. And let's be really clear why China and WADA want to deflect and turn the attention on other people for asking the questions that we've asked. The accountability is absolutely essential, and it's their actions in covering up these cases. Enough is enough. And athletes who have been in the system, like a Michael Phelps or an Alison Schmidt who testified in the U.S. Congress under oath, their confidence is undermined. And how can it not be? All of our confidence is undermined when you see the global regulator and national organizations acting in the way that we now know that they acted.
Give our viewers an idea of how rigorous a testing regime would be for a prominent American athlete, and to what degree is that standard replicated around the world?
Well, we hope it is. And look, we're not perfect by any stretch, right? Like, I mean, we have limited resources, and we're human, and we make poor decisions all the time, but we do follow the rules. And our athletes are held to the highest of standard, as they are in many countries around the world. And that is how the system is supposed to work. And athletes from Australia and Canada and New Zealand and the United States and throughout the Middle East should expect the rules to be applied evenly. And unfortunately, what we now see in this case in particular, but also in the Russia case, also with the clenbuterol cases, that they haven't been applied at the same level. And there's been unfair treatment of athletes. And that's a system that just can't possibly sustain itself or frankly exist in the way that it currently does.
Now, I was reading that since the Olympic Games originally started, about 35,000 medals have been given out, but 150 or so have been revoked because of doping and other things, obviously doping in more recent years. Which particular sports have had the highest number of drug sheets? We're talking about swimming in this case, but which other sports?
I don't have them off the top of my head, but you look at the high-risk sports where there's money, where the drugs are going to have a major impact and difference making. So whether it's swimming, cycling, track and field, weightlifting, wrestling, you look at the high-risk sports, and not to, in any way impugn those sports. I think what is critical is that those sports have systems in place at both the international level as well as the national level to ensure that clean athletes' rights are protected, and that there's an infrastructure in those sports. Although all sports, frankly, need it, because the drugs can help anybody that runs or lifts weights to stay in shape or needs fitness or hand-eye coordination, these drugs can help you. So every sport needs the system in place, but those at the highest risk, where money, where fame, whatever else may contribute to that, have to have the most stringent and robust systems in place.
I was wondering to what extent technology has made it easier to identify drug cheats, or perhaps easier to even cover them up.
Yeah, I think obviously technology can be used for a good purpose and bad purpose. We're using it as best we can, integrated into our test selection process. So we'll bring in data, have a risk analysis that's based on logarithms, and we're incorporating AI into that now, where it can analyze performance results, someone coming off retirement, someone that might have come off of an injury, who they're being coached by, all those types of things that used to take a lot of time and was very cumbersome to do with human intelligence. We now can do that through technology, and it just makes the precision under which we test that much better.
An unexpected improvement in a country's medal success could result from a new coaching regime or better training facilities. Now, what do you say to those who accuse the US of sour grapes as a result of athletes losing out on medals through fair competition?
Yeah, look, I think our athletes, and you heard it from Allison Schmidt in her testimony, were perfectly satisfied with silver. If that's the best they did, and that's the best and clean and under the rules, the China team that they lost to in that 2021 4x200 freestyle relay, she testified to that under oath, and she was perfectly satisfied with that. Where it haunts people is after the fact. Here we are now 3 years later, and it's been exposed that those athletes had positive tests that weren't handled in accordance to the rules. So I don't think it's sour grapes at all. I think it's athletes who want their rights upheld. We have freedoms in our country where athletes can use their voice and ask the questions, and should not be afraid of those who might try to squash them or scare them or retaliate against them for using their voice. And I think athletes around the world, if they had those same rights, they'd be saying the same thing, because athletes put their entire life and career and sacrifice so much to be the best that they can be and win the right way. And when they get robbed at the global stage, who are we to tell them they shouldn't be upset when they get robbed at the global stage by those who weren't following and playing by the same rules?
You've spoken very much, obviously, in support of those athletes who are looking for the fair playing field. Do you know of any athletes who'll be competing at these games who fear they may lose to competitors who are doping? And what do they say to you?
Well, 100%. The China situation is unique. You have positive tests for a very potent performance-enhancing drug, while they were 3 years ago. The sanction for those, look at the Russian figure skater Valieva. She got a 4-year sanction for it. That raises a whole host of questions, not only about the competition in 2021, but 11 of those athletes with those positive tests are coming to compete here in Paris in 2024. So, of course, that is an acute situation that raises major concerns by athletes from around the world. And it's not just U.S. athletes we've heard from, but we've heard from Australian athletes and English and British athletes and Canadian athletes who are equally upset by this. And then it's just trust in the system. WADA's job is supposed to be to ensure that athletes around the world are held to the same standard. And when you see what happened in Russia, and they weren't being held to the same standard, and they got away with intentional state doping for so many years, and then it wasn't effectively handled by WADA until whistleblowers again in the media put it out there, and then it was dealt with not in a very effective way, I might add. And then you now see this again. Is this the tip of the iceberg? Or are there more cases being handled this same way? And those are the questions that athletes have and need to be answered, and give them the confidence that they deserve.
So what will be your thoughts as the swimmers take to the pool in Paris in just a few days' time?
Listen, I think, if you're a clean athlete, you need to go out there and win. At the end of the day, if someone's cheating you, just go beat them. And that's how you ensure that your rights are upheld, most importantly, to win the right way. But the answer is not to go and cheat. The answer is, and this is the issue, we don't want to set up a system that encourages other athletes to cheat because they believe they're getting cheated. They need to have confidence that that's not the case. But just go out there and win the right way, and make sure you're doing it the right way.
If no athletes test positive during the Paris Olympics, will you celebrate that as a great achievement for clean sport, or will your instincts be suspicious that something may have been missed or covered up?
I think at the end of the day, you have to take joy in what these athletes are accomplishing. I think the overwhelming majority of Olympic athletes around the world, and particularly in the U.S., they don't grow up to say, oh, I can't wait to be an Olympic champion so I can inject myself with, TMZ or, EPO or whatever dangerous drug it might be. They want to be the role models that they're held out to be. Okay. And I think we have to take advantage of that starting point for athletes. But we do that by demonstrating to them every time that we're fair and the rules are going to be robustly enforced.
Considering your demands for accountability and considering the controversies that are very much now public, what's your message to the millions of sports fans around the world as they watch an event which is seen as the global pinnacle of sporting competition?
Demand better. Demand through your governments who have a seat at the WADA table. Do op-eds in the press. Really look at the rights that are involved here and the injustices when your country's athletes go to the highest level and get robbed by athletes who aren't being held by the playing field. I think we have to double down on the Olympic Games. It's too special to back away from. You know, in the Tour de France, when the corruption was exposed around the Lance Armstrong case a few years ago, right, some sponsors left. I don't think that's the answer. I think we have to get this right. We have to fight this battle to win it for clean athletes, because ultimately that increases the brand value, the market value, the interest in the public, in the competition itself. No one wants to see a rigged competition when clearly those on drugs are the ones who ultimately are winning. That's not an environment that is profitable for sport or is good for what the Olympics is supposed to be about, which is people coming together under an agreed set of rules and compete, yes, in a friendly environment, but compete on the highest stage with respect for one another's competitors, because you know they're playing by the very same rules that you've agreed to play by yourself.
All right. Well, Travis, Tygart, thank you so much for your time. Great talking with you.
Thanks, Riz. Really appreciate it.
My next guest is one of the most successful swimming coaches in history and has trained Olympic champions from both China and the US. Mark Schubert coached the US swimming team at 8 successive Olympic Games and trained scores of medal winners. He spoke out against a suspected doping regime among Chinese swimmers at the Beijing Olympics in 2008. But after being fired from his position as US national coach in 2010, he later took up an offer to help coach the Chinese team. Mark Schubert, thank you, sir. Now, your journey as a member of the US Olympic swimming team's coaching staff began in 1980, and the US boycotted the Moscow Olympics that year because of the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. Now, you'd have been aware of doping in swimming at that point, but it was Europe rather than China in the spotlight at that time, wasn't it?
Yes, actually, we became acutely aware of it in the Montreal Olympics in '76. I was the coach of Shirley Babashoff, who would have won multiple gold medals. But the East Germans obviously were juiced up.
Now, you continued to serve on the US Olympic team at every Olympic Games until 2008, when they were held in Beijing. At the time, you raised concerns about doping among Chinese swimmers. What were your suspicions then, and how long do you think it had been going on?
Well, again, since I have been doing this a long time, it was in '94 at the World Championships in Rome, where we were really acutely aware of the Chinese doping. And in fact, it got so bad that when the Chinese were on the award stand, everybody in the stadium, everybody turned their backs on them. And then, of course, they got on the plane and went to Australia, and the doping people were there to greet them, and they all tested positive. It was pretty tragic.
So there was proof rather than it just being a suspicion.
Oh no, there was definite proof.
So, when you recall it, the World Anti-Doping Agency was formed in 1999. Was that something you welcomed, or was it something that, did it have a big effect on the sport?
I think it probably kept a lot of people more honest. I certainly welcomed it. I think most of the coaches and the people in the sport, and even the swimmers, welcomed it to try to keep the sport cleaner. Of course, it always seems like technology is ahead of the testers, and so there always seems to be some way to dope. But I think it has kept the sport cleaner than before.
It's interesting you say that about technology. I was wondering what the testing regime was like in those days.
Well, that's when we would test all of the medalists and then one additional finalist at major championships like the World Championships and the Olympic Games. And then eventually they went to testing without notifying people. You'd have to turn in what was known as a whereabouts form, and you had to let them know where you would be at all times. And if you weren't there and they came to test you, you got what was known as a strike against you.
If you have your coaching record, you've coached literally thousands of swimmers in your time. Were you aware of any of them doping at any time, or you know, did you find out later any of them had taken banned substances?
Unfortunately, I was coaching a Canadian athlete, and this was in the 90s, who did test positive, and he left our program. Obviously, I asked him to leave our program. That's the only athlete that I've had test positive.
Now, how did it make you feel when one of your swimmers, someone you'd spent hours and weeks and months, even years training, lost out to a competitor who you suspected or knew had been doping?
First of all, sadness for the athlete, knowing how much effort they put into success on the international level. And then on my part, bitterness toward the people that were tested positive. And in the case of the East Germans, it was later proven that some of the athletes didn't even know that they were doped. It was the officials that were doping them. And those were the true criminals. And in my mind, those people deserve to go to jail.
Interesting, given the strength of your feelings on the matter and your suspicions about doping by Chinese swimmers, for example, how difficult a decision was it to take up the offer to join the Chinese coaching team that first time in 2018?
It's interesting. I did spend 6 months in China coaching. And that was a very interesting experience as far as the testing. They would test athletes on a continual basis, both urine test and blood test. And when I was there, 2 athletes tested positive. They were immediately banned from the sport, sent home, and their coaches were banned as well, which was pretty strict. And I was impressed with that.
Now, if a swimmer is doping, either as an individual or part of a state-sponsored arrangement, who do you think would know about it, and how difficult would it be to hide from testers? And someone like you, as you say, you've been in the business a long time, you've been working in an advisory role there, for example.
Well, all I can know is what I observed. They were very strict. We were actually in a training center, the National Training Center. The athletes were not allowed to eat anywhere else other than at the training center for fear of testing positive. And the athletes that tested positive, interestingly enough, had snuck out, eaten at a restaurant, and then tested positive.
It's interesting you say that, because I was going to say, when you saw the recent New York Times report, which revealed that 23 Chinese swimmers tested positive for TMZ in January of 2021, 7 months before the Tokyo Games, what did you make of that? And did you accept Shinada's explanation that the athletes had been inadvertently contaminated at their hotel?
You know, it's difficult for me to know who's right and who's wrong. If you have 21 athletes test positive at the same time, something's going on. Either it's a state-sponsored thing, or their excuse may be correct. Because a lot of times when you're at a competition and you're staying at a hotel, you don't have as much control over the food as you do, say, when they're at a training center and they're all eating at the National Training Center and they have total strict control over it. And I know the Chinese are very worried about and concerned about eating outside a controlled situation.
I was going to say, with the effort that you put into coaching athletes, and so many as you have over the years, when you look at the state of affairs, do you feel let down?
You know, I think in '76, when Babashev was cheated out of being the most decorated female Olympian ever, I felt let down and I felt bitter. Since then, I've tried to approach the sport with the attitude that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that my athlete is ready to compete, to make sure that my athlete is knowledgeable as to what's legal and not legal to make sure that my athlete is clean. And outside of my control, I can't do anything about it.
Sorry.
It's the only way I can approach the sport and have fun with it, because I have to admit, in Montreal, I didn't have much fun because of the cheating that was going on, nor did all the American women. The men won every gold medal but one event, 200 breaststroke. The women lost every event except for the last event, which was the 400 free relay. Unfortunately, Shirley was on that relay and got one gold medal out of that Olympics.
I was going to say, following the Tokyo Olympics, you were again engaged by the Chinese swimming team in a supporting or advisory role. And you worked with some of their gold medal winning swimmers, such as Li Bingji. And you expressed shock when she broke a woman's 400-meter world record by a huge margin in 2022. Was there a voice in your head which made you wonder, is there something going on which I don't know about? Or did you put it down to like great ability in coaching?
Well, she had great ability. I was fortunate enough to coach her. Great trainer, amazing athlete. And to be honest with you, that record was short course meters 400 free, and it was a very cheap record. Not too many people compete in a high-level competition in that event. She did swim an amazing back half. I did not have a suspicion, simply because I was so much involved. I saw how often she was tested, and I was glad to see the record get into a more honest range, just because the short course meter records aren't really anything compared to the long course meter records, if that makes sense.
Well, would you work for the Chinese swimming team again?
No.
Because of the experience?
My experience with the athletes was exceptional. I only worked with 3 athletes. They would do anything you asked them to do without question, and do it very well. Facilities were fantastic. I made a lot of friends among the other coaches. The food was awful. I had pig's feet for Thanksgiving. And you weren't allowed out of the training center for good reason, but it wasn't much of a life. They paid you quite handsomely. It wasn't worth it.
Well, it's been reported that since arriving in Paris, the 31-strong Chinese swimming team have been tested 200 times in 10 days. With a frequency that, with that kind of frequency, do you think it's impaired their preparations? Do you think they're being unfairly treated?
I don't think anybody should complain about being tested. And if there's suspicion, I don't blame them for testing them that much. The thing is, I don't know how accurate being tested 10 days beforehand would absolve them from cheating, because a lot of the cheating can be done 2 months, 4 months, 6 months before the event to enhance the training. And it's the training that results in the performance. Obviously, there are things that you can take immediately before that will help the performance. But it sounds to me like if they've been tested that much, that's not going to come into play as far as they're concerned.
Right. Mr. Schubert, your track record really is quite remarkable. I'm wondering, do you know how many Olympic medal winners and gold medalists you've coached over the years?
29. And that's just Americans. I don't keep track. Oh. I don't keep track of international athletes, but I just keep track of USA.
Well, so as one of the most successful swimming coaches of all time, what's your message to fans around the world who'll be watching the Paris Olympics in a few days' time? Will they be able to believe what they're seeing is a fair competition?
I think in many sports, there's always going to be people that try to get a leg up. But I think if you keep an open mind and know that the majority of them are going to be clean, and I think the people that are, the best athletes in our sport, the best swimmers, those people are going to be tested a lot, not only at the competition, but before the competition, months before the competition, while they're in training. And I think the sport is much cleaner than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Well, sir, before you go, I want to get your perspective. This year's Olympic Games has been trying to achieve gender parity between numbers of male and female competitors and have come quite close to achieving that. But there are only 2 athletes who identify as non-binary or transgender. Do you expect those numbers to increase in the future, or do you think the prospect of transgender athletes competing in the Olympics remains a long way from actually being resolved?
I think it remains a long way from actually being resolved, and I think there's going to be a lot of bitterness towards that. I have no problem with somebody that wants to change their gender. I have a big problem with a male that turns female, has had the advantage of all that testosterone earlier in their life, and wants to compete unfairly, in my opinion, against females. And I think you'll see that legislated against.
All right. Well, Mark Schubert, it was really great to get your perspective. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
It's time now to get an athlete's perspective on all of this. Mark Foster is one of the most successful British swimmers in history. He won 6 world championships, was a 5-time Olympian, and carried the British flag at the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics in 2008. So what's it like to line up poolside when you're convinced the swimmer next to you has been using performance-enhancing drugs? Let's find out. Mark Foster, thank you very much for joining us. Now, can you give us an idea of the experience athletes such as yourself have had to go through to comply with anti-doping tests? How does it affect your life?
Historically, we have a form called whereabouts, the whereabouts form, and basically I had to give an hour a day. I can't remember, 6 or 7 days a week where I was going to be in a certain space, whether it had been. I mean, I used to put it between 7 and 8 in the morning because I knew I'd be in bed because I didn't train until 10 o'clock in the morning. So, or what a lot of people do is they either give their training times in the mornings to the afternoon, and you have to give an hour a day where the testers can come and find you. And that can be anywhere in the world. It's obviously very simple when you're at home, but when you travel on training camps and competitions, you still need to do it. I think it's called My Whereabouts, the forms.
All right.
And if you don't do it, and you're not somewhere where you're meant to be, if you get 3 strikes, you then get a fail.
To what degree did you feel it was worthwhile to go through the inconvenience and perhaps indignity of it all for the sake of the sport?
I think the bottom line is that is what you have to do. And I think ultimately any athlete wants a clean sport. So everybody, in my opinion, everyone will do their bit to make sure that the sport is clean. But then like in life, you'll always get people that try and sort of cheat the system. So did I find it a hassle? From time to time, you fill out 3 months in advance. And of course, if things change in that period, you've got to make sure you change your form. So you have to get on top of things. But then it's one of those things that you kind of say, well, if that's what I need to do, and I want the sport to be clean, then I know the rules and the regulations, and I just have to abide by it and hope that everybody else is doing the same thing and abiding by the same rules and regulations, that we do get a sport that is clean. Because I like to think that everyone wants a sport that is clean.
Now, do you think the system of national and global anti-doping agencies is working effectively today?
No. Do I think it's bad? I think it could do with improving. The difficulty is, from what I see, is that you'll always get someone or even, I would say, federations or groups of people that think that they can, let's say, beat the system or cheat the system. And there's always going to be, and that's not just in swimming, that's in sport in general. And you'll always get people that might think, oh, okay, if we do things a little bit differently, we cheat, we can gain an improvement. And I don't think that's like people trying to rob a bank. If they think they can cheat the system and get somewhere in an easier way, then they're not willing to put that hard work in, and they'll try and do it. I've always thought innocent until proven guilty. I've always liked to think it was a level playing field, but clearly it's not. And when situations arise like they have done over the past decades, and this isn't a new thing, this has gone on over decades, I'd like to think we can clean it up, but it's a tall order.
For someone like yourself who's trained so hard to reach the level you have, what's it like to line up against opponents you knew or suspected of cheating?
The thing is, I never knew. I think I always thought innocent or proven guilty, and a lot of fingers were waved at certain people. And for all intents and purposes, I won 6 world championships, 11 European championships, and 2 Commonwealth Games. I never won the Olympics. I went to 5 Olympics, but I kind of think I had my good days. Did I think I was the best 50-meter freestyle on the planet? On a given day, I was. On another day, when someone had a better day than me, they were better than me. But I never stood on block thinking, Bob or Mikhail or whoever are taking drugs and I don't stand a chance. I always thought that I like to think that everybody was abiding by the rules like I was, and I believed it was a clean, level playing field until it came out that 1 or 2 people may have been tested positive. And in my event, that never happened. So, but I did see signs maybe in a changing room at a World Cup where I saw the odd syringe. Now I could go that, but being playing devil's advocate, I could say that could be diabetes. I don't know. I don't think it was, but I always like to think of the positive nature of humans as opposed to the negative nature of humans until they are tested positive, and then they do the back, and then they I always think you do the crime, you do the time. They get what they get what they get.
Well, of course, the urge, the drive to win is very high, especially when you train as hard as someone like you do. Do you feel the initial impetus to cheat comes from the athlete, the coach, or perhaps even the national team?
Well, they'd have to speak to a cheat. Well, we've seen that, okay, Russian athletes have been banned. Why were Russian athletes banned? Because there was a systematic doping program in place. And I believe, and I don't know all the details, that came from the top. And then on another platform, again, I don't know the full details, but if you look at the training groups that went on in athletics in America, I think the 100 meters runner, Dwayne Chambers, got messed up in it. There were different groups of athletes training together in America, and they were doing things wrong. So I don't know if that came from the groups. I don't know if it came from the federation. I don't know if it comes from an individual when an individual goes to a local bodybuilding gym, for argument's sake, and somebody there goes, "Oh, I've got some drugs you can try and you can use. Why don't you take these?" I think it's a little bit more clever than that. But what I'm saying is, I'm sure in instances it starts with an individual because they don't want anyone else to find out. It starts with a group of people that's very, very tight, so they make sure that no one else finds outside the group. Or does it start on a much bigger scale, and everyone that's part of the national team becomes part of that program, and to become part of the national team, you need to become part of that program, and that's what you believe you need to do. So I can't say.
Interestingly enough, there are even senior coaches who believe there may be athletes who don't even know they've been doped the way things work, sometimes behind the scene.
Again, I don't know the full detail, but I kind of try and put myself in other people's positions sometimes, and I think that if I was, I don't know what goes on in China, right? I don't know what goes on behind closed doors in China, and I'm sure everybody outside doesn't know what goes on at night. So I'm playing devil's advocate. But if I was given a flat and I was part of the training program and part of the national team, and I was told to do this training and take this little tablet, which is a vitamin tablet, and I don't know any different, I'm going to take it. Or I'm told the rest of the world is doing the same thing, and I believe it. And why am I not going to believe it? Then I be part of the system, and I do what I'm told to do. So, and I'm not saying that's just a Chinese thing. That could be a British thing, could be a European thing. I don't know. I don't believe it is, but I try and put myself on the other side and go, well, if I was part of the system and I was told this is the way, this is what I had to do, I'd make a choice. Now it's easy for me to make a choice sitting here from the life I've lived, but I don't know anyone else's choices or the way that they live. So I don't blame people. As you say, sometimes people maybe don't even know they're taking what they're taking because somebody says you're taking a vitamin tablet.
What do you think should happen to those found guilty of doping?
I say you do the crime, you serve the time. I think the bottom line is if you do something and you're tested positive, then you should get banned. I am a great believer that whatever I put in my mouth is whatever I eat, whatever I digest is down to me, right? So if I take a vitamin or I take a protein supplement, no, I take it, just take it. But I don't know what's in it. I'm still putting it in my mouth. So it's up to me then to get that product tested. And I think there is a website called 100% Me, where you can go on there and it tells you if you want to use a protein supplement, which I like taking protein supplements because I make a milkshake and I like milkshakes. But I also know as an athlete I'm doing a lot of protein, so I used to take a lot of protein supplements. But I would make sure it came from 100% Me, which was batches of supplements that have been tested, so you knew that they were clean. Because I know an instance, and I can't remember his name now. I used to train with an American swimmer who had served the ban. He wasn't the top tier American swimmer. He was the kind of next level down. He was a good swimmer. He may have made many other national teams. But he took a supplement called, I'm going to make the name up here. I think it's something called Ultimate Orange or something. It was a supplement that went on in America for a while. But it had speed in it. Now, he didn't know it had anything in it. He was just taking it because he believed he was training hard and he needed supplementation. And then he got banned. So he got tested positive and he served the ban. So my thing is, whatever you put in your mouth is down to you. I can't blame my coach for making me eat a steak or my parents for making me eat a steak. I still eat a steak. So if I want to be that careful, and I know I'm a professional athlete, you've got to be careful. You've got to do everything possible to make sure that nothing goes in your body that is not going to come up and be a red flag.
Right. Now, every time the spotlight shines on the Olympic Games, it seems to illuminate an aspect of cheating. Now, what impact has it had on public trust in the sport, do you think?
I like to think that, and I think in swimming we've got generally a very, very clean reputation. If I look at the Tour de France historically, and I don't just mean the Lance Armstrong scenario. I think across the Tour de France in general, there was a massive problem. Now, you might have seen that with bodybuilding historically. I never felt it was part of swimming per se because there was never much up for grabs. It was kind of like there was no money in the sport. And I think obviously money changes the way that people think and they feel and what they'll do. But what do the public think? I think every time something comes out, it just takes a little bit of a shine off what I think is a very, very clean sport. And I think minority sports are very, very clean. I mean, you have to speak to some public person. I like to think that everybody thinks that sport is, especially swimming, is a healthy sport, a clean sport. And it's a good sport to do. But yeah, any test that comes out, I think people just raise an eyebrow and just kind of, I think when people hear of something coming up of a doping violation, they automatically, or some people think, oh, well, of course they all do it. And they don't.
Right. You know, it's interesting. You say minority, but of course, minority sport, but still the training, the effort is huge for people like yourself. So, you know, if people do raise an eyebrow, what do you think needs to be done to restore trust so people can have confidence that they're watching fair competition at the Olympics, for example, which is supposed to represent the pinnacle of sporting events?
I think when it comes to the Olympic Games in particular, it's in the spotlight, and it's once every 4 years. And I think that anything that does come out from the Games is magnified because it's the Olympics. So the press will obviously magnify any fault that goes on, and rightly so, because I think I like things to be, sorry, if you've done wrong, then you can't look at anybody else, and if people are going to write stories about you, then they deserve to write stories about you. I don't know, it's just, I mean, it's always one of these things, I hate talking about drugs because I like to think of the positive side of the sport. That's not just the positive side of the sport for generations to come, elite athletes, etc., but the positive side of the sport. But you're always, unfortunately, going to get the odd person that's going to cheat. But I just like to think that our drug procedures are so much better nowadays that we're going to catch those people. And if those people are then put up in the spotlight, other people, if they're thinking that they might want to cheat, will then think, well, hang on a second, maybe I won't go down that route because that's going to happen to me. So the better our testing procedures get, the less opportunity or the less potential opportunity people are going to think about cheating. But if that's systematic doping that comes within countries in the first place, I was reading some stuff about when I knew I was going to talk to you about Chinese swimming for argument's sake, and they're over in Europe at the moment, and they're being tested an awful lot, which is great. I've been brilliant, fantastic. But what about 3 months ago, or 4 months ago, or 6 months ago, when you get the benefit of taking drugs and training? So yes, brilliant for doing it now, but what happened 6 months ago? What happened a year ago? What happened 3 months ago? What happened 5 years ago? And I think that I remember the '94 World Championships in China, in Rome. A lot of women's events were won by Chinese swimmers that weren't renowned for swimming in the first place. And a big doping scandal came out, and they were banned for a year, couple of years, or something. Something happened within the sport. Anyway, they went backwards, and rightly so. But my thing is, unless you're able to get into a country and just go wherever you want to go and test athletes unannounced, then we're never going to clean it up in certain places.
You know, Mark, your greatest achievements were won in the pool, and there's been much discussion about the open water events in Paris and whether the water quality could be dangerous to competitors due to high levels of sewage in the water. Would you be happy to compete in the River Seine?
Well, 50 metres, I'll probably be all right to don't breathe. But if I was a triathlete or a long distance, I think the bottom line is if they do the testing, right, and they say the water's clean, then I've got trust that it's clean, and I'm going to get in there and swim. The problem might be that they say it's clean, all these athletes go and compete, and then a month later they've all got E. coli. No, I can't say they're going to or they're not going to, but I can only go with what the authorities say. Would I be happy to swim the Seine? Well, yes, if they told me it was clean, and I'm going to go by what people tell me. So, but they've also spent, again, I don't know, these are things I hear, £1.8 billion cleaning the Seine up. So, of course, they want people to swim in it. Otherwise, they've spent this money doing nothing. It's wasted.
Mark, let's finish with another issue that's been discussed passionately in connection with the Olympics and sport in general. Now, there are only 2 athletes competing in Paris who identify as non-binary or transgender. What are your thoughts on the participation of transgender athletes in sport?
Well, first of all, they should be able to compete in sport, or they should be able to participate in sport. I think when it comes to I'm going to call the Olympic Games, I'm going to call swimming professional. My problem was, and I don't know all the names here, but Leah Thomas, who before was, I'm going to say William Thomas, but that name might be wrong. William Thomas in the 500-yard freestyle in America was about 100th in the men's. Then William Thomas became Leah Thomas, and then became #1 in the women's event. Now, I think that's completely unjust and unfair against women's athletes who have fought for years for equality. And I think it's unfair. So I think the bottom line is there needs to be, and it comes from X chromosomes or XY chromosomes, and you probably know the terms better than I do, but from birth, if you're one or the other, that is it. You can't transition to the other, because I know it's unfair. Because if I took myself in my prime I did win the Olympic Games, but my belief is if I transitioned and I became a woman and competed against the women, I would have wiped the floor with them, and I just think that's unfair. No. So there should be male, female, and if they're going to go that far, have a trans category if that's what they want the Olympic Games or any other championships in particular.
Right, it's a tough discussion in a sensitive time, of course. So, Mark Foster, thank you so much for your perspective. Great to have you on the show.
No worries.
As we mentioned at the start of this episode, stories of cheating in the Olympic Games stretch back to ancient times when the Roman Emperor Nero gate-crashed the Greek Games and won a chariot race by using 10 horses instead of the 4 permitted in the rules. And horses have not escaped cheating claims during the modern Olympic era. Germany was stripped of the equestrian team gold medal at the Athens Games in 2004, when the horse ridden by Ludger Beerbaum was found to have ingested a banned substance. Well, speaking of beer and banned substances, the first Olympian to be disqualified for doping was a Swedish pentathlete at the 1968 Games in Mexico City. Hans-Gunnar Liljenvall consumed a couple of beers to steady his nerves before the shooting round, causing the whole Swedish team to lose their bronze medals, even though beer wasn't officially on the banned list. And that brings us to this year's event. And after claims that the River Seine was too polluted to host the open water swimming event, the mayor of Paris herself took to the water. Well, you could call the idea insane, but at least she was able to provide some reassurance to those hoping that athletes taking part will be, at least in this respect, clean. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.